is going to be more talk than show. So there won't be any clips of bees buzzing around, me falling out of trees, or all the other bits and pieces that you like so much. And it's about something that is very seasonal, and it's not swarming, it's hay fever. Now I suspect every beekeeper has come across this idea that honey helps people with their hay fever. And when I do farmers markets at this time of year in May and June, I almost dread it, to be honest, because so many people come up about honey and hay fever. Now, in case you haven't come across this, the idea behind it is that you take local honey, and you should take the honey from preferably the beginning of the year. The idea is that you have a sort of Mary Poppins thing of a spoonful of honey helps the hay fever go away. So you start taking it at the beginning of the year, and you don't wait until the symptoms kick in. The other part of it is that the honey that you take has pollen in it, and because the honey is local, the pollen is from local flowers, which are the ones that are causing the hay fever. And the result of taking regular doses of local pollen is that you build up an immunity to it, so that when the hay fever season starts, which is now I assume, you will have built up an immunity, and you won't suffer from hay fever. Now I've repeated this countless times over the years I've been doing markets and selling honey, yet for some reason I just became a little unsure of it. So I decided I'd have a look into how this works, and this is what the blog is going to be about. So what we'll do is we'll have a look at the component parts of the honey helps hay fever principle and see how it stacks up. Now the first thing is the idea of local honey, and I am asked endlessly by people, is your honey local? Now, to be honest, I don't really know what local is. Is it 1 mile? Is it 5 miles? Is it 50 miles? There is this principle that local honey is good for you, but there again we seem to accept that Manuka honey, which comes from 6,000 miles away, is good for you. The reality is all honey, provided it hasn't been processed in any way, is good for you. So I don't really know what local means. I've only ever had one bloke who wouldn't buy the honey because it wasn't local, and that was a market in Stony Stratford, which is just outside Milton Keynes, and is about 25 miles away. Is local 25 miles. Now the thing about this for me as a beekeeper is that with the bees, how far do they travel to get nectar and pollen? Now, according to Wikipedia, it's this. So basically bees aren't going to travel more than a couple of miles. And bees, they're not stupid. There's no point in them flying 10 miles and consuming a vast amount of energy getting there when they don't get much food at the end of it. So bees will only fly a relatively short distance, and I think 2 to 4 miles is probably it. Now the bees that are here, in a good year, the field over the back there has oilseed rape in it, and the field behind me has what's called wildflower mix in it. The bees don't have to walk, the bees don't even have to fly, they could walk to get the pollen if they wanted to. So local is a strange thing, and if you think of the one market that I'm doing at the moment, or they may well stop, which is at Bromham Mill, that's 6.5 miles away from here. There is no way any of my bees will get down to Bromham to collect nectar and pick up pollen. So I think the local thing is weak. Next is the idea of pollen from local flowers that will be in your local honey. Now, honeybees aren't the greatest pollinators in the world. Solitary bees are better at it than they are. Honeybees use it as a food for the young bees, and they are very meticulous about how they collect it. They maximise the amount they can get back to the hive, and you will have seen pictures of the yellow pollen sacs on their legs, and when they get back to the hive they will store it in the cells of the comb. Now, the reality of it is that there is an infinitesimally small amount of pollen rather, in the honey, and I've seen it said that there is between 0.1 and 0.4% of honey that is the pollen, far below the amount you might need to build up some sort of resistance. And I think there's an issue as well about this idea about local flowers and local pollen. To use an example of the comedy villain of hay fever, oilseed rape. Now, there have been in past years out the back there fields full of oilseed rape, and from that the bees will put an infinitesimally small amount of pollen into the honey. But I have to wonder, what is so unique about the pollen that comes from that field over there? The oilseed rape is grown from seeds that the farmer buys from a seed merchant, and he will have sacks of seeds of exactly the same seed. Some of these sacks will go to Bedford to be planted in the field over there, and some of these sacks will go to Newcastle and Wales and Scotland and Norfolk. What is the difference between the oilseed rape that is over there, that is supposedly local, and the oilseed rape that is in fields up in Norfolk? Nothing whatsoever. So I think again, I was digging around looking at this whole issue of hay fever and pollen and honey, and discovered that between 80 to 90% of people have hay fever caused by grass seed, not by pollen. And classically it will be trees, or a particular source of hay fever is a reaction to ryegrass and something called timothy grass. Now, apparently the pollen for particularly timothy grass, which is grown as a food crop for livestock, is incredibly fine, and if you walk through it you will get clouds of pollen being thrown up in the air. And so these grasses are wind pollinated, where the pollen is blown around in the air and people inhale it, and it causes hay fever. The plants that the bees go to, their pollen is very heavy and very sticky, because they want the plants want the pollen to stick to the bees, not fly around. So if there is any any pollen at all in honey, it isn't going to be the pollen that causes hay fever, which, as I said, is tree pollen, ryegrass and timothy grass. So the local pollen, local flowers, local honey thing seems to break down again. To try and find some sort of definitive, sort of scientific view on this, rather than just wandering around Google, which is what I was doing, I wrote to two of the biggest allergy charities in the country and asked them, what is the deal with honey and hay fever? The first one came back and said this. The other one came back and said this. They're both saying the same thing. It is essentially an urban myth, and there is no scientific evidence for it whatsoever. If anything, there is evidence to prove it doesn't work. Apparently there was a review done in Canada where people, hay fever sufferers, were given a variety of different things, and the ones with honey had no better results than anything else that the people in the program were given. So there's no medical evidence for it, and it makes no sense whatsoever. So I carried on and I had a look at the NHS website. Now the NHS has views about honey and its therapeutic powers, and as you probably know, it says quite clearly, for example, you don't give honey to kids under a year old. So I had a look at the NHS website to see what they said about honey and hay fever, and they said this. Now, it seemed to me then that, okay, well that's pretty scientific, pretty conclusive rather. I think most people would tend to take the word of the NHS over something like this. But the thing about the NHS was that they talk about possible treatments for hay fever, and they talk about using steroids, which is not great. But they then do say about, and I'm going to pronounce this wrongly, immunology, where essentially you take a little bit of what's causing the hay fever to see if you can build up an immunity. So that appeared to sort of slightly undermine it, the idea that this hay fever honey thing is nonsense. However, continuing to plod around, I then got to the Bupa website, and they talked about this sort of system of taking something to build up an immunity to it. And what does it refer to? So it seems like there is no basis for this idea of honey, local honey, helping people with their hay fever. However, there is something else to consider here, and it's something I hesitate to talk to people about in some ways, and it is to talk about placebo. Now, Placebo is not the appalling 90s band of that name.
Alcoholic kind of mood. Lose my clothes, lose my lube. Cruising for a piece of fun. Looking out for number one. Different partner every night. So narcotic, out of sight.
Oh, Brian, stop it. But the medical condition whereby people are given apparently a medicine that they are told will cure or help with a condition that they suffer from. So what happens is a group of people will be given a medicine to help with something, and some of the people there will be given something that has no medical content in it whatsoever. A sugar sweet, a smart, something like that. And perhaps surprisingly, some of the people who get this non-medicine actually show improvement in their symptoms, despite the fact there's nothing in the medicine they've taken. And so I met somebody a year or so ago, Val, and she was a nurse, and she was involved in clinical trials. The sort of things where groups of people will be given medicines to see if they worked on their condition. And I was talking to her about that because she was interested in the whole thing of honey as a medicine. And she said that the placebo effect is well recognised but very poorly understood. And she often comes across situations where people have been given something for their condition which they are told will help them. It has absolutely nothing inside it chemically that would help them, yet they show some improvement in the symptoms. So, what do I say to people if they ask me now? Now, if somebody comes up to me at a market and says, is your honey local? I'll say, I come from Ravensden. And they will probably say, good, that's local. I hear local honey is good for hay fever. What is your opinion? Then I will go through the things that we've looked at and leave them to make their own mind up. However, if somebody comes up and says, is your honey local? And I'll say, I come from Ravensden. And they will say, great, that's honey that's local, that's really going to help with my hay fever. What do I say? Well, I could explain the principles behind what we've talked about. I could then explain how the placebo effect means that people could delude themselves into thinking that what they're taking is helping with their symptoms. But what I actually say to them is, that'll be £4.50. Would you like a bag with it? Thanks for listening.